You've calculated the effort differential in your relationship, not with a spreadsheet, just with that quiet awareness that lives in your chest, the one that keeps track of who remembers, who plans, who tries harder. And you've never said it out loud because naming it feels like admitting something you're not ready to face. You're not keeping score because you're petty. You're keeping score because some part of you is trying to understand why the math never balances, why you're always the one carrying more, and why, despite knowing this, you keep adding to your side of the equation. There's a specific psychological pattern behind this, not a flaw, a pattern, one that developed for reasons that made perfect sense at the time. And understanding it isn't about fixing yourself or changing them. It's about recognizing what your nervous system learned about love a long time ago. Because overgiving in relationships isn't about generosity, it's about safety, or what your system once believed would keep you safe. The pattern shows up in specific ways once you start paying attention. You're the one who notices when something needs to happen, a birthday approaching, plans that need making, a conflict that needs addressing. And you don't just notice, you handle it. You take on the mental load before anyone else even realizes there's a load to carry. When you do something thoughtful, there's often a quiet hope attached to it. Hope that this time they'll match your energy, that your effort will spark something reciprocal, that giving more will finally inspire them to give back. And when it doesn't happen, when your effort is met with less effort or no effort, something inside you adjusts. You tell yourself it's fine. You tell yourself you don't need much anyway. You tell yourself that expecting reciprocity is somehow demanding or needy. So you keep giving, not because you want to, because stopping feels more dangerous than continuing. Research on relationship patterns suggests that this often traces back to childhood experiences with controlling or invalidating parenting, not always abuse, sometimes just an environment where your feelings weren't quite safe, where expressing needs was met with dismissal or control. Maybe your emotions were too much, too inconvenient, or they were ignored until you learned to stop having them out loud. Maybe love came with conditions, when you were useful, agreeable, not too demanding, and your developing brain drew a conclusion that made perfect sense given those circumstances. If I manage my needs carefully, if I don't ask for too much, if I make myself helpful and easy, then I'll be safe, then I'll be loved. You became highly attuned to other people's emotional states. You learned to read rooms, sense shifts in mood, and predict what someone might need before they knew they needed it. You learned to control what you could control, your own needs, your own reactions, because you couldn't control whether your feelings would be met with care or dismissal. These are sophisticated survival skills. They kept you emotionally safe in an environment where safety wasn't guaranteed. But skills that protect you in childhood can trap you in adulthood. Because your nervous system is still running the same program, the one that says more effort equals more safety, more giving equals more love. Needing less makes you easier to keep. There's another concept that reinforces this pattern. It's called intermittent reinforcement, and it's one of the most powerful psychological mechanisms for creating persistent behavior. When someone gives you attention or affection inconsistently, sometimes they're present, sometimes they're distant, your brain responds to the unpredictability itself. The uncertainty creates a psychological pull that's stronger than consistency could ever generate. This could explain why you might find yourself giving more in relationships where you're getting less. Your nervous system may be responding to those occasional moments when they do show up, when they do try. And every time that happens, it validates your strategy. See, more effort did work. I just need to keep trying. But the cost of that strategy isn't visible on the outside. It's happening inside you. Here's what makes this pattern particularly painful. Research on sacrifice in relationships has found that about half of what you give goes completely unnoticed by your partner, not because they're intentionally dismissive, just because your sacrifices, the planning, the emotional labor, the constant adjusting, often operate in the background of their awareness. You cancel plans to support them. You manage their mood before conflict can start. You handle logistics they don't even know need handling. And half the time, they simply don't register that you did anything at all. Which means half the time, you're giving everything and not even getting acknowledgement in return. Not gratitude, not reciprocity, not even recognition that you gave something up. But here's where it gets more complicated. The same sacrifice can feel completely different depending on one specific factor. Relationship researchers call it perceived partner responsiveness. It's whether your partner truly sees you, understands you, validates you. It's whether they demonstrate that they understand what your effort cost you, that they recognize the weight you're carrying, that they care about your internal experience, not just the outcome of what you did. When perceived responsiveness is high, when your partner notices, understands, and values your sacrifice, giving can actually feel lighter, meaningful, like it's building a connection instead of draining you. But when perceived responsiveness is low, when your partner doesn't see the sacrifice, doesn't understand what it took from you, the same action becomes crushing. You're not just giving without getting back, you're giving without being seen. And that invisibility, that's what makes the pattern unbearable. Because you can handle giving more when the person truly understands what you're offering, but giving everything to someone who doesn't even notice you're depleting yourself, that doesn't feel like love. That feels like drowning while someone stands on the shore unaware you're even struggling. Every time you give more than you receive, your internal sense of value recalibrates slightly. You start to believe that being low maintenance is a virtue, that not needing much makes you easier to love, that the less you ask for, the more likely you are to keep someone. So you quiet your needs completely, but your body knows the difference. The exhaustion you feel isn't from the giving, it's from the internal negotiation between what you need and what you're allowing yourself to want. You can see the cost in the small moments. It's in the way you feel a specific type of tiredness that sleep doesn't fix, an emotional exhaustion from constantly managing more than your share. And it's in the way you feel simultaneously resentful and guilty about the resentment. You're angry that you give so much and get so little back, but you're also angry at yourself for being angry. That internal conflict, that's the real damage, the war you're waging inside yourself about whether you're allowed to want more. There's a concept in family systems psychology called differentiation. It refers to the ability to maintain a clear sense of yourself inside a relationship, to know where you end and someone else begins, to give without losing yourself in the giving. People who overgive often struggle with differentiation, not completely, but enough that their sense of worth has become tangled up in how much they can do for someone else. Their value feels contingent on their usefulness. And when you're deriving your worth from being needed, from being helpful, from being the one who gives, you become dependent on that role. Stopping feels like losing your identity, like losing your purpose in the relationship. There's a difference between generosity and being trapped in a pattern sustained only by what you give. Real generosity comes from overflow, from having enough internal security that giving doesn't deplete you. Overgiving comes from deficit, from trying to fill an internal emptiness by filling someone else's needs. The pattern isn't your fault. It developed as a response to circumstances where it genuinely helped you survive. You learned to manage your needs carefully because expressing them wasn't always safe. You learned to give more because you learned that love had conditions. Those weren't failures of character. Those were adaptations of a brilliant, resourceful nervous system, doing everything it could to keep you safe. But adaptations that worked in childhood can create suffering in adulthood, because once you see the pattern, you can start to ask different questions. Not how do I get them to give more, but what am I afraid will happen if I stop overgiving? Usually, the answer is abandonment. You're afraid that if you stop being the one who does everything, you'll discover that you are only valued for what you could provide, that without your usefulness, nothing is keeping them there. And that fear, that's the wound, the one that keeps the pattern alive. Healing isn't about becoming less giving. It's about learning that your worth isn't located in what you do for other people. It's intrinsic. It exists whether you're giving or not, whether you're useful or not, whether you're making someone else's life easier or not. Some people will only value you for what you give them. That's not a reflection of your worth. That's information about their capacity. And people who can only receive but never reciprocate, they're not villains. They're just operating from their own patterns, patterns that don't have space for mutuality. You can understand that without sacrificing yourself to it. The pattern will keep running until you decide it doesn't have to anymore, not because you've fixed yourself, because you've seen the strategy that once kept you safe now costs more than it protects. And you, my dear, deserve more than survival.